welcome back to Visions. I'm Mirella Rich. If you've just joined us, we're here with director Joe Lowe and producer Dennis Smith of the documentary called Constructing Fear. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Now, can you tell us some of the other stories that have happened on this documentary that you cover?
Probably one of the other major ones is the case of the WA 107, where you have a bunch of workers on a job site whose union delegate was sacked. They had had long-running disputes with the company about serious safety issues. They basically sacked the union delegate to silence those issues. They went out on strike. They voted to go out on strike. They went out on strike for 2 weeks. The union delegate wasn't re-employed. They basically lost that strike. And 3 months later, they were all served with individual writs. They had someone come to their house, often late at night, often, you know, with their wives answering the door. They're handed a piece of paper, and that piece of paper says they're facing fines of $28,600 as individuals for what's classed as illegal industrial action. These are people who stood up for someone they respected, stood up for a mate, stood up for a union delegate who they all agreed was doing a really good job, and then was sacked because he was doing such a good job. So not only did they lose their voice on the job, a lot of them were then sacked, and then on top of that they're now facing $28,000 individual fines. I met these people. None of these people have anywhere near that kind of money. The provisions in the Act state that if they can't pay the fines, they can repossess cars, houses. So, I mean, these are ordinary working people now looking down the barrel of losing their home because they stood up for themselves. And I don't think people in Australia even realise that you've lost the right to strike, but we have. You know, it's another thing we've just let sail by.
And Dennis, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, it's interesting to talk about the word strike, which is important, and that's an industrial action. But there's also the ability for people to stand and talk in a workplace meeting, and sometimes that's important too. And this legislation has made it very, very difficult for those people to get together, particularly with their union representatives, and say, oh, well, wait on, there's something here that needs to be addressed and we'd like to have it looked at, you know. And I think that's part of the tragedy, and I think the continual feedback that we're getting about Joe's film in this instance, Constructing Fear, is that Australians are looking at this film and saying, I didn't know this was going on.
I didn't either before today.
And I think that's savagely important. And I think if this has been a consciousness-raising exercise, then it's been very, very well dealt with by Joe. And his ability to get into the homes of people all over Australia and find out what the impact of this fear has had on their lives.
Because you want to feel safe in your work environment, and you want to speak up if things aren't right and feel like you've been listened to and respected. And it's a pity that this isn't happening in the building industry.
Well, I mean, meetings on building sites are essentially illegal too. If you have a meeting on a building site and it's during working hours, you're paid docked for 4 hours. So if you have a 10-minute meeting and someone says, what's going on with the work choices laws, suddenly that's an industrial meeting, your pay is then docked 4 hours.
Wow.
So, I mean, I think people all around the country have meetings every day in their workplaces about workplace issues. But if you're a building worker and you do that, suddenly you're working for nothing for the next 4 hours, and if you complain about it or go home rather than work for free, you're facing $22,000 fine.
Do you know why it's so severe?
It's all about this mechanism of constructing fear. You know, here is a draconian legislation, and in a way, we're not really even in this film attacking the ABCC. The ABCC, for the faults that we reveal in the film, is still a legitimate government body, you know, and it is administering an act of Parliament that is pernicious and in many ways evil, you know. It's an act of Parliament that has been brought upon us by the Howard government, which is changing the way that Australians deal with each other. I mean, and we see it as the thin end of the wedge. And yet, for some reason, it's been savagely neglected in the media.
Wow, it's amazing. What made you so passionate about making this film in the first place?
My father was a building worker. He had been on jobs himself where people had been killed. He'd been on jobs, I mean, one of his friends had a brick wall, half-finished brick wall collapsed on him and broke his friend's back. You know, it's those kind of things that turn people into what would be referred to as a union activist or a radical trade unionist, or in John Howard's terms, a criminal. So I grew up, you know, hearing about those kind of things and seeing the effect that fatalities in the building industry, for example, have on people. And I grew up understanding why you need active trade unions in an industry like the construction industry. So I had some awareness of it, and when I saw Brodeen's story in the paper and saw this woman in tears under a headline of Mother Faces Building Watchdog, I read the article and took it from there. And what I uncovered was an incredible story about the denial of civil liberties to a large group of Australian people. You know?
Well, let's hope that all changes. We're about to go to a break now. Stay with us. We'll be back with more of Visions very shortly.